The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand. We gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise to get what we want. We got to organize.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Pantsula Podcast, brought to you by the All Africans People's Revolutionary Party. For those of you who are not familiar with the A-APRP, we were founded by Kwame Ture in 1968. Our objective is Pan-Africanism, and we define Pan-Africanism as the total liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. Today, I have my fellow comrade with me, Winfred, who I'll let introduce our two ancestors that we'll honor today.
So our first ancestor is Desmond Tutu, born October 7th, 1931, and moved on to the ancestors on December 26, 2021. He was a Southern African archbishop who worked towards human rights and then worked against illegal apartheid in South Africa. He argued against using economic pressure to bring about universal suffrage and co-led the anti-apartheid negotiations alongside Nelson Mandela. As a theologian and pastor, he merged the ideas of African-American theology with South African theology and pushed against imperialist actions and against apartheid as a member of organizations such as the South African Council of Churches, the All Africa Conference of Churches, and as the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Our next ancestor is Funmilayo Kuti. She was born October 25th, 1900, and moved on to the ancestors on April 13th, 1978. Born Frances Abigail Olufunmilayo Thomas, also known as Funmilayo Anikulapo Kuti. She was a Nigerian educator, political campaigner, suffragist, and women rights activist. Funmilayo was born in Abeokuta, Ogun State, Nigeria, and she was the first female student to attend the Abeokuta Grammar School. As a young adult, she worked as a teacher, organizing some of the first preschool classes in the country and arranging literacy classes for lower income women. As an activist during the anti-colonial period, she founded the Abeokuta Ladies Club, made up to 20,000 women who fought to protect and advance the rights of women against the colonial government. She was succeeded by her children Beko, Olikoye, and Fela Kuti, who went on to play important roles in education, healthcare, the arts, and political activism.
Yes, and we definitely want to honor our ancestors for all of the work that they've done. And today we're going to talk about what it's like being in an organization. This is our 51st episode, the last episode of the year. And I know, looking through the episodes, we've talked about a lot of different things. And, I'm just remembering what it was like for me joining the organization. And, 51 episodes later, definitely a lot to learn. And we're still learning about just the very thick piece, just all of the layers to colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, and all of those isms. And I just thought this would be a great topic as we go into the new year, just talking about what it's like for us to be in organizations and kind of how, that necessity is definitely needed for everybody, every African, because we know that the education that we receive from the mass media is obviously bourgeois idealism. A lot of it is just, or all of it is just to get us to remain on that treadmill to capitalism. But we know with organization, we can, take our analysis and fine tune that analysis and just get a better understanding of just some of the forces we're dealing with. And so I guess we could just start off by talking what's it been for you since you joined, and, how has this process equipped you with better strength to fight these forces?
So I've been in this organization for about a year so far. And what this organization has provided me so far has been a way to really understand like a lot of the logics and a lot of the reasonings behind so many of the things going on. So I think I got into the A-APRP really through rummaging through YouTube. So finding Kwame Ture, like YouTube videos, like listening to Michael Parenti, like Amos Wilson, like a bunch of like, uh, yeah, a bunch of individuals who fortunately had like a lot of their like wisdom and resources available online. Um, Through the organization, I've actually been able to really like sharpen my understanding of a lot of these different tools. So get to interact with people who have been through this and have been at this for like years, if not decades, and like just understand really more about like not just about like where I am now in the U.S., but really about like Africans everywhere on the globe.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one thing I'm very much appreciative of this organization for. We are always talking about Africa because Africa is primary. And of course, if you're reading and you're following mass media, you're not going to hear nothing about Africa. And the things that you hear about Africa are not going to be aligned to the interest of Africans in Africa. But the A-APRP, we understand the necessity of having a political education and going through the work with talking with people. As you said, we talk to people, we have these meetings, they're task force meetings. It's not like we're just reading books. I want to also stress that joining an organization is not a book club. We do understand the necessity of books because we're not anti-intellectualism. We know that we need to be educated and we need to have a framework of how we come to the understandings that we believe. In the organization, for me, in the same way, I joined watching a lot of videos of Kwame Ture, kind of going down this rabbit hole. And I had to really answer that call of action of organization because, everyone's talking about doing something. Everyone can be aware, or a lot of people can be aware of the systems that we're fighting with. But if you don't answer that call of action, which is to organize, then, you're just going to be left with a lot of complaints and no real solutions. And we know now, and we have been knowing for quite some time now through the many examples that have been passed down before us, no people joined in any type of revolutionary fight did not understand, or they all understood the necessity of being in an organization and being on some type of united front so that they could be aware of the systems that are against them. And of course, that's not necessarily the most accessible to a lot of folks, meaning that kind of messaging of being involved in something bigger than them, like an organization. It sounds too serious. It sounds official. It sounds like, oh, what are you asking me to do? But I mean, I know for me, when I joined originally, I was a bit burdened by some of the responsibilities because I can admit, and if anyone's watching this video, you all can admit this too. Society doesn't teach us to have any responsibilities to anybody, much less an organization. But the contradiction
Only really to those.
What's that?
There's only a society only teaches you to have an adherence to your bills.
Yeah, thank you. I was just
not the community.
The bills is different. Like we don't ever tell the job, yo, I ain't coming in today. I'm not working them 8 hours. Nah, we understand that. And in the same way, that same understanding should be shared for organization, because if we know that we're dealing with a beast of just years and years of oppression that's had so much time on its side to come up with clever ways to enact deception and psychological warfare, if we understand that, then of course we should be encouraged to join an organization, because that's going to give us the tools, that's going to equip us with what we may not have at the point before we join the organization. And even while being in an organization, those constant, characteristics of improvement are going to constantly be in work. We're not going to ever be, let down, because this work continues, and there's no need to just be burdened and feel afraid. But, and then we've talked about this before about not being afraid of the struggle, but that there is a lot of fear because the system tells us that we can't do it and that we're unable to do it, that we can't actually unite, when we honestly know that we can do it. And that's the only way in order to do that. But it's like the podcast you did with Sadiq yesterday. There's a lot of reactionary forces. And those reactionary forces are definitely not encouraging us to unite, but to just divide on our personal isolated phones, arguing online, not really having a principled conversation. And I think what we need
Arguing
more,
just to argue.
yeah, just arguing just to have somebody slam dunk you online or anything, but there's no principle conversation. There's no work being done to actually fix the issue. And I think one reason for that is, again, people don't think that they can do it. But we can talk about some of the things that have been done to combat these changes. Some of the organizations, we have SNCC, we have the OAU, we have so many organizations that have done the work. And yet organizing is a afraid thing. Why is that such a scary word? And why do you think folks are so afraid of understanding that necessity, especially as a young people? Because again, young folks, you know, we online, we all these places, but when it comes to being in a place or to be in a space like an organizing space, that for whatever reason prompts fear, but we don't have that same fear for, like we mentioned, like the jobs and the bills and all of the things that we're forced to kind of deal with.
I think one reason why that could be the case is a fear of, I think sometimes we try to look for like the perfect answer to everything. That's like the easiest thing to do. So like, let's say if I was going to like start a petition, I think like just asking people, hey, sign this petition to end racism. People like, it's just very easy and like just very easy to do. When it comes to being part of an organization, it takes like a good amount of time, a good amount of effort. It requires accountability to other people, which we aren't necessarily used to, at least in this like hyper individualist society of the US. And requires a good number of things that isn't that's outside of the sphere of, oh, just like go to work, put in the 8-9 hours and then get the money.
Right. Well, one word that came to me while you're talking is struggle. Right.
Yeah.
That's what we do in organization spaces. We're going to struggle. We're not going to agree with everybody. We're going to have different perspectives that are said, and we're going to talk them out and reach some form of resolution. And that's not always easy. Many folks are afraid of struggle because it's, you know, being called out, you know, and we have this criticism and self-criticism process where in which we call out the things that can be improved. And, you know, this very much can be afraid, you know, people are afraid of that because it's like, oh, you know, you're telling me something that I may thought I knew. And it's like, actually, you know, let's look at the history of this because, you know, dialectical materialists, we're looking at the history and the actual physical documentation. We're not just in our head because we understand that it is actually what's around us and what actually can be felt. And the material world is responding to conditions where in which capitalism brought those conditions by. And we can't act like it's just come out of nowhere when we know the history. We know that this comes from a rich history where in which this was done and justified through white supremacy and through all of these other ideas that made us feel, and that constantly makes us feel like the only thing we can do is just get money. The only thing we can do is just, you know, have a good job and not be so burdened by being tired all the time, not having all our needs met, but somehow reaching this place of success. But again, that place of success is linked to suffering and struggle. And for me, this organization, and you know, one thing we always say in the A-APRP is that if you don't like our organization, you can find another one or you can start your own, but you have to be involved in the process because, and for so long, I remember just listening to these videos before I joined the organization. I was trying to find formulations as to why I didn't need to join the organization. Like, well, I don't need to join this organization. That's like saying you need to go to church. But this organization has done way more for me than and I've been in many churches. And this organization has done way more for me than any church has done, because it's not just about blindly accepting what the pastors say or blindly accepting what any institution says. It's actually, you know, being a materialist about it and, you know, reading things that you don't always agree with, challenging yourself to get to that higher place of understanding so that you're not just accepting whatever normative has been presented. And that's something that takes time. That's not something that always, you know, people should read and really do their research before they're just jumping into everything. But also, back to the podcast that Jamila and Evan did, don't fear the struggle. Don't think, oh, well, because it's too much or because it's so much responsibility, I'm just not going to do it. And it's like you said, we don't always have the answer for things. And another point to that is just being honest with folks. When we're talking to people in our everyday lives, I'm always trying to think of ways to talk about this organization because it's obviously influenced me in so many ways. And I understand the necessity of African people having this collective thought. And one thing I'm always trying to think about, and the question I have to you, like, what are some ways we can, and we briefly talked about this too, when we were talking about Pan-Africanism to friends and family, like, how are we able to talk about this in a way that's received? Because as we talked about in our work study today, not everyone is equipped with the ability to read. So there are ways of getting this message out without, the general usual way. So what are ways we can bring about this consciousness of socialism and Pan-Africanism in a way that will cause some sort of interest to pull that forward?
I mean, so like even socialism and Pan-African was born out of the ideas of like people who were working, people who like were living in the system and then saw both the material conditions of themselves, like what things they're producing, and like saw like, oh wait, I'm not the person, although I'm doing all this labor and producing all of these things, I'm not benefiting from the fruits of my labor like somebody else is. And like it was from that like relationship between like the work, like people who are actually creating things, and the things that they're creating, and like all people really in society, that the ideas of like socialism was born out of. And so I think like the best way to like to address it with people who aren't familiar with like all the lingo and buzzwords is really just to talk about material conditions again in a way that they can understand. So it's like, oh wait, like why is it that like if we're talking about like a country, for example, the Congo, you can say, oh wait, like why is it that like this country has so many resources, but like none of them, but like there's so little like use of those resources within the country itself, and then just have a conversation about it. Like, is it really just the leaders that are like uniquely bad, or is there something that's pushing those leaders to take certain actions? And then talk about like I think one thing that's like also good is like just seeing an overall view of all the things that's happened in terms of imperialism. So like if you just like have a map and then like point out in like these 52 countries in Africa, there has been like a coup that was backed by a European government. That's a pretty good, that's a pretty clear indicator that like something's going on. So just like for one, like visuals, pointing out, okay, like these are the attacks on that have been in Africa and in African communities in the diaspora, and among like really all African descendants, and showing how like there's been like a very clear concerted effort across like all communities, and across like just a bunch of different communities really in the world, about this, on top of like talking to people about the material conditions as to like how it directly relates to them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And material conditions, yeah, we got to talk about that because I think most folks know what it's like to be oppressed because we have the same oppressor. It's not like my oppressor is different from your oppressor because you look different or because you live somewhere differently. And when you talk about a system that's oppressing, it's much easier to have these conversations. One thing I did recently, we were talking about, like wage slavery and how, there's this all conversation about 5 for 15 here in the Snakes. And we all know for those that have worked 15 hours is not enough to live off of. And why is that? Why is it that they're pushing 15 as opposed to a living wage? Why is the language like we should interrogate the language for the things that we're talking about, even when someone's talking about defunding the police as opposed to abolishing the police? Like, what's the difference between revolution and refarming? Like those are the type of conversations I like to have, because the language, as you said, there are a lot of buzzwords and, juicy phrases that we can use in these organizing spaces. And, we're developing an analysis of it, but the everyday person, they may not know the term neocolonialism, but they know what that looks like. They know what it looks like to have racism and white supremacy, wear all of these various dresses, in which they're able to get through that same type of toxicity. But, identity politics, you got puppet governments, so these conversations can be had. It's just about really listening to because people are telling you just honestly, like, I mean, in social media, it's funny because, on social media, you're not getting that honest reflection because a lot of it is visual. So people will show off the impression that they're doing good and they're traveling and they got this knowledge and stuff. But if you would really talk to them, they would really show you and tell you, like, yeah, I'm struggling. Like, I don't got it. I'm just, but I'm trying and I'm hoping. A lot of people live off of credit. So, I mean, you're
just doing the best you can.
Doing the best they can, exactly. And why not be joined to a collective that has that united front and understanding that, we got to do this together? Because if this society is individualistic, which it is, then that means all of the information we're going to get is going to be through individualistic lens, whereby we won't be able to really ask our neighbor or to just be honest with folks like, yo, I'm going through something. I need help with it. I need a break. Just speaking honestly, because a lot of capitalism forces us to just be these pretenders and to act like we got it together and we don't need each other. And we know now, being in this organization, and I say we as in you and me and anyone else in the organization has that knowledge of knowing this is not enough to just have, to have surface level, thought. We got to go deeper because we're dealing with something that's much more thick in its delivery. Yeah, much more complex. This isn't not something that's just been here for a little time. It's had a long time to evolve and to become more clever. And in the same way, we have to understand we got to go through that work. And that's the struggle, because again, when I say go through the work, studying, reading original resources, independent resources like primary sources, that ain't easy all the time because, it's taking time from the actual book, but you got to put the book down and highlight it and, you do all this stuff just so that you can challenge yourself so that you get that right information, because what you don't want is to speak. And unfortunately, this is what's happening a lot. A lot of people are speaking without actually understanding where that framework is coming from and where that ideology, because everything is political. When you have that understanding that everything is political, then you're just not going to be like, oh, I'm not talking about that. You understand the linkings of all of these things. And that's not, again, that's not going to be the display that we get from general mass media. They give us sound bites, just a little bit of information, and then we run off of the reaction of whatever that information gives us. But to true education and true constant, learning is understanding that there's no graduation, that we're going to constantly find other ways to fine tune our analysis and come to a better understanding. And we have historical documentation of many ancestors that have done the same thing, because it's not like you're going to agree with yourself all the time, especially if you're going to get that challenge, that it's a need for that struggle to get to a higher place. One thing we talked about before, and we can just talk about again, like the process of how we get to some sort of answer. We have democratic centralism, where everyone is, talking about the matter and get a chance to just make a decision. And then once that decision is made, we all go forward with that decision. I don't agree with that decision. Even if you disagree with that decision, after everyone has gotten a chance to talk about it.
If we come to a consensus, then.
Yeah. But that fights against the individual need to just prove, well, I feel right about this because I want to do, what I think is best. You got to turn that I to a we, basically. Because we, the collective, we're trying to get a better place of understanding, and that's not going to just come through individual. Oh, but I thought, and that's encouraged by the media. That's encouraged by, self-indulgent. We don't have to do research. We don't even feel responsible, because one thing capitalism does as well is take away our responsibility for the things. Like these problems are too big to handle. We're not going to be able to do it. We don't need somebody else to do it. So it just resents the notion that we can actually handle this on our own. And they have, you look at what they've done to our freedom fighters like Malcolm X and Fred Hampton Jr. These people were assassinated publicly to prove a point, to prove that, yeah, you want to go hard, for liberation, this is what's going to be done to you. And for a lot of people, that silences them. It's like, oh, people are dying. We're being killed by the police. Why are we being killed by the police? Again, having that organization is going to tell you why that's going to happen. So you're not surprised by the things that used to surprise me before I joined the organization and before I had the analysis. Don't surprise me so much because I understand that we're in the empire. We're the empire. They have an objective. You can't sway them. You can't try to, encourage them to do differently because they know what they're doing. It's just about the collective masses knowing that we have to gather together collectively to fight this thing because we're not doing it through individual efforts.
And by doing things through like an organization, like each of our individual efforts can be like fine-tuned towards or against like specific goals. So like as an organization, like the work of Kwame Nkrumah, Kwame Ture, Sekou Toure is able to be continued through with all the work that we're doing now as an organization. And like back to the point of democratic centralism, or like really like having an organization in which like everybody gets to present their ideas, and we can like talk about the ideas and come to a consensus about them. And even if we don't necessarily agree with each other, if we come to a consensus, we can move forward with that consensus. An example of that is actually with Kwame Ture. I think this was when he was still a part of SNCC. So he had worked with to help lead a protest. I think one of the marches with MLK. He didn't necessarily agree with the path of like non-violence completely, or like the path of like mainly doing like primarily marches. But he knew that it would be better for him to work alongside really other people in order to advance civil rights for Black people in America, as opposed to like starting an internal war or starting an internal fight that could distract both him and other people from advancing their goals. So what he did was he was part of the march, and then like when they're going through Lowndes County, as part of the march, he started like getting people's numbers and contact information, and said like, this is like the march, but we'll be back. And like through the march, he was able to get so many people's like contact information, and started like after the march started talking to them, started organizing, and that's actually like one of the beginning points of the Black Panther organization that started in Oakland. So it's through like working with fellow people in organization, and then using your individual skills and talents within that organization to really make movements, and to make organizations and make progress on the goals that we have.
Yes. And this reminds me of another conversation we've talked about, and we can talk about this again, the differences between mobilization and organization. Because Martin Luther King Jr. was a great mobilizer, and he did a lot of work, mobilizing people to gather together, have, these marches. But that's not the same thing as being in an organized mindset and being an organizer like Malcolm X, or Kwame Ture, or anyone that is aware that, you got to be in this thing all the time because the system is gathered. The system is 24/7, 365, right? And that type of, and it's not even like it's going to require, I'm not going to act as if this ain't going to be work. I mean, because it is work. It's work. Yeah. You got to, joining meetings, being on task forces, having work study, you do those things, but you understand why those things are done. And an organized way makes it happen from the ground up. You're following up. So it's not just like reaching out to people. And that's something I've also just been reminding myself of doing. It's one thing to say, hey, how you doing? And it's another thing to reply back to that, how you doing? Because someone asks you how you doing. Oh, I'm doing well. And it's like, hey, haven't heard back. Following
just
up.
High and by.
Right. Just high and by. Exactly. But organization requests and requires that sense of follow-up, right? So you want to see what's happening. Like, what can we do to make sure, you're following along and things are done to an efficient level? Because We want it to be, efficiently organized as possible. And that can only happen through understanding that day-to-day need and
having relationships with people.
Yes. Building relationships, international solidarity is another aspect, because again, we can't struggle in the vacuum. We can't be like, well, only Africans struggling, so I'm only going to talk to Africans. We're the only ones struggling. I actually even had a friend say that to me recently. Like, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I don't see why you got to work with the folks of the Irish Republic or the Cubans or anyone else that's struggling against. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? Like, that doesn't even make sense from a strategic standpoint. Like, why wouldn't you want all hands on deck? Because again, we have a common enemy. There's the people's class and the anti-people's class. That's it. Like, we got an oppressor. So why not have everyone who's being oppressed join with that understanding? And to the degree in which that oppression is reflected, and all of this going back to land, Africa, the land of Africa, continent of Africa, is being just taken advantage over through all of these policies, through the stealing of the resources. And these things are happening from a scientific level. They understand why they're doing it. And we have to be in tune to that so that we don't feel like we're not confused, because a lot of it is just ideological confusion. A lot of folks are just wondering. Again, I was one of those people too. Why is this happening? Why is it that everywhere we go, we're being hated or we're being, this, that, and the third? But when you internationalize the struggle, when you build relationships amongst people who are struggling as well, you understand, so it may look different where I am, but it's being governed by the same hand. And that's the type of knowledge one needs to get, so that they're not, again, worried or afraid or even feel hopeless about the attitudes of how oppression works. Because psychological warfare happens as a kid. It starts really early. The moment you can start, singing the ABCs, everyone knows the ABCs, right? Because, you heard that through a song. And that's the same time you get the Pledge of Allegiance. And before you know it, you'll be speaking on the behalf of the empire, as if the empire is not at fault. And then what everyone else needs to do is pull themselves up, work hard. And it's like, no, you don't want to do that, because by doing that, you're co-signing with the oppressor. You're saying the oppressor, what they're doing is justified. Most folks would be like, oh, I'm against the government. I know they're corrupt. But then the further context to that corruption is understanding what's your participation in answering that corruption. What can you do to fight against that? And this is why we say organization is the answer.
Exactly.
Because, there's one thing that's just, you can type online and you go crazy, right, about the things that you have an issue with. But these things follow a system. Focusing on individuals, the politricks, that's one aspect of oppression as well. We got neocolonialism. There's a new form of colonialism in which it may not be somebody that is not looking like us. They might not be European. They might not have blue eyes. They could be an ambiguous African, and they still have the interests of white supremacy, and they're outside of the interests of Africa. And then that person who's, because white supremacist, anyone can be a white supremacist. You don't have to be a white person to be a white supremacist. And coming to that knowledge, I remember thinking, wow, really? But it's like, of course, not all kinfolk are kinfolk. Not everyone who's just coming to you and like, yo, what's up? Like, I'm here for you. Yeah, just elect me and I'll do your bidding. And then once they're in office, they don't do that bidding. That's because before they got into office, they were selected and they were given that task to fulfill that assignment. So we're not confused around who's going to be able to say this or that. We understand that this is something that requires, you got to be strategic. Just use your brain. Think. And I'm not saying this feels as like you're not using your brain, but it's just very easy to shut off the brain and just react to stimuli. As Kwame Ture said, you're reacting to stimuli as opposed to thinking about it and really asking yourself, why is this happening? Because these are not hard questions to answer. The answer might be hard to get to, but we have a process to help us get to that. And that discipline is it's an everyday thing. And being in an organized space, we're sharpening each other daily, and we're constantly being aware of the many ways that these things are connected, building relationships, as you said. So it's something that I think, looking through the episodes online, and I've watched all of them, of course, and we encourage you all to watch them. We talked about a lot of different things, and we continually are talking about them, and we want more feedback because I know again, not everyone is hearing the same way. Not everyone is reading these books. Not everyone is being able to get this information in a way that it speaks to them. And what we want to do is just make sure that this communication is as clear as possible so that that call of action is finally answered. Because you keep hearing all the time, we say in every episode, you got to organize, you got to be in an organization. We're not just saying that. We're saying that because that is the solution, because the framework of capitalism is organized. That's why. And if something is organized and something is not organized, who's going to be in a better position to win? Person who already got it together, person who's already thinking that way. We got to think that same way.
One good example, well, a good and classic example really is MLK's like bus boycotts. So like in that boycott, it really required the masses of people to have the discipline and have the level of organization to like find other forms of transportation when going to work, going to school, going wherever they needed to go in their daily lives. Like it had like a huge impact on them. But because they were organized, like it wasn't just one person trying to figure out, okay, like how am I gonna do, like how am I really going to transport anywhere that needs to go? Through organization, they're able to set up means of like transportation, like have people take certain cars, carpools, different things like that. And it was really through working with other people that one, if I were to join, if like somebody was to join the boycott, they had like a clear way of like avoiding the buses, or like a clear way of like helping be part of the movement. Um, yeah, and that really wouldn't be possible on a like one person by person basis, especially if like you don't necessarily have the means or the money to just like avoid using public transportation for a year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings to mind, the Black Panther Party and what they had with breakfast programs and the survival programs, to the point back to what you were saying about meeting the material conditions. A lot of folks are struggling. We are struggling, but there are folks that are struggling even in closer spaces that work could be done in those places directly. There are food drives and breakfast programs, things like that, so that there's some interaction with the community. Because one thing that we know is that the more capitalism expands and the more there's gentrification and people are kicked out of their neighborhoods and having to live on the street, that's going to prompt an even higher rage among the community, because you can only beat down a couple of people for so long. And again, back to the point of mobilization, that's been a consistent scientific fact in our history, because think of what happened last year. And I'm living in Minneapolis currently. And when George Floyd passed away, the riots that took place here and all over the nation and all over the world was a reflection of the conscious understanding that this is not right. This should not be happening. So what did people do? They got together, they went out, they had posters, they had signs, they took their family, they unfriended all of their family that went against it. They did all of these symbolic reactions. But then they went home. And the media understood that they went home. So they gave you a new story, tame your anger, calm down for a bit, focus on this. And then before you know it,
replace the narrative.
Yeah, replace the narrative. And then before you know it, no one's even talking about it. Now it's like seen as justice when the person, Derek Chauvin, is sent to prison. It's like, oh, yeah, we got justice. And it's not to say that justice, well, it is actually to say that real justice is the abolishing of the police state and abolishing of these oppressive forces, because one man down isn't going to do anything for the multiple people right now who are being tackled in the prison system and these courtrooms. So it's to remember what the focus is, and it's also to not be distracted by the thing they get you to react to, because it's very easy to just think that, oh, since one person is down, we've actually had justice. But if the system is not being handled, we're not talking about the police unions, we're not talking about all of the laws that protect the cops and the systems that enable this type of violence, then we're not really getting anywhere. We're not getting a reason to celebrate, because the real danger is still happening. And people have to understand, it's like the police force, it's like a tree, and one apple fall, the whole tree is rotten. It's not just that one apple, the whole tree is rotten, the whole tree. So the whole tree has to be uprooted. We can't just take these individual people and sacrifice them and be happy that they're out the way, and then not act like this tree isn't producing even more corrupt. Again, it's a system. It's a system, and when you understand that it's a system, it's not about what puppet is speaking for the system. It's about the system itself.
Yeah, and understanding like what pushes people in that system to take certain actions. Like if somebody's doing the right thing, and then they get punished in the system. Is it really a problem with individuals, or is it only a problem with individuals, or is it a problem with everything involved?
Yeah, like that would be the question. Like, is it the individual, or is it a streamline through policies and legislation, right? Because that's the substantive thing that's causing all this to happen. Who cares? Is whoever's the front man or front woman or front whoever. That's not the motive. The motive is the system that constantly creates that. So that collective force, when we can gather together, when we speak of unity and we speak of, talking to folks that you're not going to agree with all the time, but you organize with them because you have an objective, that is the creme of the creme. That's what we need to be doing, because this fear of, I can't talk to them because they believe that way, focusing on these other, we're building a party. It's not like, the party's already done. We're building this party. We're constantly going through this work. So it's a day-to-day thing. Mistakes are going to happen. That's what the criticism and self-criticism process is for, to advance us to get better. But we move forward with the knowledge that we're dealing with something that has been around for a long time, that's very complex, very mature in its delivery. And we got to educate ourselves consistently. And that practice is actually enthralling. It's invigorating, because it's knowing what the goalpost is. It's remembering what the objective is. It's also acknowledging the ancestors. And speaking back to our channel, I went through a channel, and unfortunately, I say unfortunate, but maybe not too unfortunate if you guys take the time to watch the episode that we did. Our least viewed episode is We Are Our Ancestors. And definitely encourage everyone to watch that, so that you all know, all of this talk that, I wouldn't do that, or my ancestors. We come from people. We have history. We have a record of slave revolts that happened throughout the beginning, since our people were enslaved, fighting against this system. So it's not like we haven't fought back. That's all we know. But if we don't understand that historical necessity, if we don't understand why our people fought back, then we're going to be, I forget how the quote is. If you're asking, I believe the quote is, if you're asking what your ancestors would have done when slavery happened, look at what you're doing right now. Like, what's your reaction? Capitulation? Or are you going against it? Like, are you going with the stream? And it's harder to go against the stream, but that's the struggle. Going against the stream is going against the status quo, going against everything they're telling you to do, because that's what's needed revolution is a fundamental change in what the world is like. It's a radical, we talking, what you really going for? Yeah. The eye twisting, I can't believe that thing. Everybody, all Africans, no matter where you fit on the spectrum, all Africans have that right to self-determination. But we have to be united in order for that to happen. So, I know we've said many things that has been said before, but do you have anything else to add before we finish this podcast?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up.
All right. I figured. One thing I will say, though, is for those that want to keep up with the other comrades that are doing this work, there's the Forward Ever podcast on Spotify. There's Our Ancestors' Voices with Lajamu Umi and his daughter Shakura with the A-APRP. There's also, we'll put the link in the description of the various people. A-APRP New Mexico. There are a lot of people who are out here, Black Power Media, so many folks that are doing the work, giving you all propaganda for revolution. So be sure to check that out. And as we say all the time, join a organization and fight for justice. And if you don't like this organization, or if you think this organization is not useful, build one, connect with your community, and let's fight this thing together. That's the only way we can do it, is on the united front. So forward ever.
Forward ever. Let's collaborate.
Let's collaborate.